My daughter lay in a hospital bed, paralysed from a crash. The surgery to save her movement was tomorrow, expensive, urgent, non-negotiable. I called my parents. I begged them. Not for money, just to co-sign a loan. They said no. 2 days later, I saw their smiling faces on Facebook, sipping wine in Bali with my sister. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, but I remembered. And when a lawyer called about a forgotten will, one my parents buried for years, I realised they hadn't just turned their backs on us. They stole from us. And I was done being the obedient daughter. The sound of the crash still echoed in my ears long after the sirens faded. Emma had always been careful, seatbelt on, no texting, responsible to a fault, but no amount of caution could stop a drunk driver running a red light. I got the call at 2:17 a.m, a number I didn't recognise flashing on my screen. I knew something was wrong before I even answered. By the time I reached the hospital, Emma was already in a trauma room. Her back was braced, her neck immobilised. A nurse explained the scans in words I couldn't grasp until the neurosurgeon stepped in. A spinal fracture, inflammation, risk of permanent damage. But there was hope, a breakthrough procedure with a 98% success rate, minimal complications, and a full recovery expected in most cases. Then came the caveat. The surgery wasn't covered by insurance. The hospital offered an alternative, older method, still technically viable, but riskier. More chances of nerve damage, more chances of paralysis. I didn't hesitate. "We'll do the first one," I said, even as the cost knifed through my chest. The surgeon nodded. "We need to schedule it by tomorrow morning. That's when the swelling is at the optimal point for intervention." Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours. I had almost nothing saved. Between Emma's college prep, rent, utilities, and juggling 2 jobs, I never had the luxury of a safety net. But I wasn't about to let my daughter face a life in a wheelchair because I didn't try hard enough. I called the hospital's financial department. There were options, they said, payment plans, personal loans, high-interest lenders. But with no assets and only my name on the application, my approval odds were slim, unless someone co-signed. I stared at my phone for a long moment, then scrolled to the number labelled home. Not mine, theirs. My parents, Frank and Darlene Walker, still lived in the suburban house I grew up in before they downsized into a condo with granite countertops and a rooftop hot tub. We didn't talk often, but surely they'd help for Emma. Frank picked up. "Hey kiddo, everything okay?" I swallowed. "Emma's in the hospital, car accident. She needs surgery tomorrow morning, the good one. It's expensive and it's not covered." He paused. "How much are we talking?" I told him. Another pause. "That's a lot, Rach. Are you sure it's necessary?" "Yes," I said, sharper than I meant. "The other option is riskier, permanent damage. I need to apply for a loan, but I need a co-signer." Before he could respond, I heard rustling. Then my mother's voice came through. "Sweetheart, we leave on Monday." I blinked. "What?" "The family trip," she said gently. "The resort in Bali. It's non-refundable at this point. We promised the kids. Melissa's been looking forward to it for months." "Emma might never walk again," I said. "That's not fair," Frank replied, his tone defensive. "You're putting us in a terrible position." "I'm asking for a signature, not money. Just your name. I'll handle everything else." There was a long, breathless silence on the line. Then Darlene spoke again, calm and firm. "We just can't take that kind of financial risk right now, Rachel. It's not personal." But it was. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just said, "Got it?" and hung up. I sat in the hospital waiting area, phone still warm in my hand, and stared blankly at the vending machine. Emma needed me. I couldn't fall apart. I opened my laptop, pulled up the emergency loan application, and began filling it out line by line, alone. The loan form blurred as I stared at the screen, the hospital Wi-Fi glitching every few seconds. I'd filled it out once already, and now I was back, trying again, trying harder, trying not to fall apart. The bank had already emailed me, approved, but only partially. I needed a co-signer to unlock the full amount. Without one, Emma would go under the knife with the riskier procedure. I couldn't let that happen. I tried calling again. This time, my father answered alone. "Hey, Rach. I found a loan," I said quickly. "They'll give me the money, but I need a co-signer to unlock the full amount. You wouldn't owe a dime, Dad. It's just your name. I'll handle everything." Another silence. He sighed. "Look, your mother and I talked. We're not comfortable putting our names on any paperwork right now. There's just so much uncertainty these days." I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. "Uncertainty? You mean like your granddaughter possibly losing her ability to walk?" "It's not that simple," he said. "You know hospitals. Sometimes they upsell procedures, make things sound scarier than they are." There it was, the twist of the knife. "You think I'm being manipulated?" I asked quietly. "I just think," he replied carefully, "if the cheaper procedure is covered by insurance, that says something. Maybe it's good enough." "Maybe," I said, "but good enough isn't good enough when it's your kid's spine." He didn't answer. I pushed once more. "Please, Dad, this is just a signature. I'm not asking you to pay. I'm not even asking you to understand. Just help me protect Emma." More silence. "I've had identity theft before," he added. "You never know with online lenders." "It's a bank," I said, deadpan. He sighed again. "I'm sorry, Rachel, I really am." I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just nodded into the phone. "Thanks anyway," and hung up. I stared down at my shaking hands. This wasn't just rejection, it was judgment. They didn't trust me, not with money, not with facts, not even with my own daughter's health. Somewhere in that call, the message had been loud and clear. "We think you're overreacting. We think you're irresponsible. We think you might be lying." I needed air. I stepped outside the hospital and sat on the cold metal bench, the city lights flickering across the parking lot. I scrolled through my phone, not looking for messages, just moving, just doing something to avoid collapsing. Then the ping came, a Facebook post. Darlene Walker tagged in a photo. "Bali with the fam, chance blessed, chance sun and spice, your family time." They were smiling. My father in linen, my mother in white, holding a cocktail in a coconut. My sister, Melissa, beside them, wearing a bikini and flashing peace signs. Her kids grinned in the background, holding snorkeling gear. The caption read like a slap. "Nothing like some quality time to reset the soul." My stomach flipped. I stared at the photo, unable to breathe. They weren't just unavailable, they were celebrating. While I was begging for help, they were boarding planes. While I was choosing between debt and danger, they were choosing spa days and seafood platters. Melissa, always the golden child. I remembered the pristine dolls she got for Christmas, while mine came second-hand. The dance classes, the brand new phone at 12, the trip to Paris at 16. I had thought it was about money. Now I knew better. It had never been about money. It was about who mattered. I walked back into the hospital, steps heavy, knees barely cooperating. I didn't look at the nurses. I didn't wave at the receptionist. I sat down in the waiting room chair, hard plastic, fluorescent lights overhead, and opened my laptop again. Line by line, click by click, I filled out the loan form a second time. No co-signer, high interest. Terms I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it didn't matter. Emma mattered, and she had me. The screen blinked once. then again, and then the words appeared, loan denied. The message was curt, automated, and final. I stared at it until the hospital lights seemed to buzz louder. I closed the laptop and folded my hands over it, pressing down like maybe I could force it all away. But there was no time for grief. Emma's surgery was less than 12 hours away. I needed another plan, one I never thought I'd have to use. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled past family. I skipped anyone who shared my last name. Instead, I called Jenny from the HR workshop I'd taught 5 years ago. She picked up after 2 rings. "Hey, Jenny, it's Rachel Walker. I'm sorry to call so late, but I'm in a situation..." I told her everything, quickly, directly. I didn't beg. I just asked. "I can send $50 now," she said. "I wish it were more." I thanked her and moved to the next name. Monica, my neighbour from 3 apartments ago, Venmo'd me $100 with a message for Emma. She always shared her cookies with my daughter. I texted an old co-worker from my waitressing days. He replied within minutes. "I'll cover the first 1,000. Let me know where to send it." I called people I hadn't spoken to in years. Parents of Emma's old classmates, the barista from the cafe I used to frequent, even my yoga instructor. One by one, the responses trickled in. Some apologised for not being able to do more. Some asked for Emma's hospital room so they could drop something off. By midnight, I had raised a few thousand. Not enough, but something. Then came a knock. I opened the door to find Mrs. Patel, Emma's friend, Priya's mom, holding a grocery bag and a small white envelope. "I saw your post," she said gently. "Priya told me everything." She handed me the bag, snacks, water bottles, travel-sized hygiene products, and the envelope. Inside was a credit card. "It's under my name, $20,000 limit. Use what you need." My knees buckled. I tried to refuse, mumbled about repayment and interest and fairness. She cut me off. "You're a good mother. Let people be good to you." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Later that night, while Emma slept under the watchful beeps of her machines, I sat in the hallway and checked my email. There was one from Mrs. Leland, my 10th grade English teacher. Subject line, "From someone who always believed in you." Inside was a scanned note, handwritten, crooked cursive. "Dear Rachel, I heard through the grapevine about Emma. I'm sending $100. It's not much. It's what I can spare from my pension. But I remember how you stayed after class to help clean up every day without being asked. That kind of heart doesn't disappear. Love, Mrs. Leland." I read it 3 times before I started crying, not loud, not ugly, just quiet tears that spilled down my cheeks and onto my jeans. Not because I felt saved, because I felt seen. Strangers were stepping up in ways my own parents hadn't. People who owed me nothing were giving everything they could. And with every donation, every call, every text, a weight lifted, but another settled in its place. A strange kind of shame. Why did it take strangers to show up for me? Why wasn't blood thicker than policy? Why did people I barely knew carry more compassion than the ones who watched me grow up? I didn't know the answer, but I knew this. Emma's surgery was going to happen, even if it took the entire world to get us there. Around 3 a.m, after nearly 20 calls, I reached someone I hadn't spoken to since college, Tina Lambert. We'd shared a dorm, a few deep midnight talks, and little else after graduation. Still, she picked up. "Rachel," she said, sleep-heavy but alert. "Are you okay?" I told her what happened, Emma's crash, the surgery, the money, the silence from my family. Tina didn't ask for proof. She didn't need details. "Where do I send it?" she asked simply. "And can I ask something?" I braced myself. "Where's Melissa in all this? Isn't she your sister?" The questions sat heavy between us. I could have explained the years of favoritism, the way Melissa got all the praise, the gifts, the affection, while I learned to make do. I could have told her about the Paris trip at 16, the SUV on her 18th birthday, the college tuition paid in full while I worked double shifts for community college. But I didn't. I just said, "She's on vacation with them." Tina didn't reply. But 10 minutes later, I got a notification. She'd posted a fundraiser link to her Facebook page. Caption: "A mother shouldn't have to crowdsource her child's surgery. Let's help Emma walk again." By sunrise, the post had over 200 shares. Donations poured in. Not just money, messages too. "I don't know you, but I believe in good mums. Sending prayers and 10. Hope it helps. Tell Emma the world is rooting for her." By noon, we had enough. The surgeon nodded when I told him. "Good," he said, professional but warm. "She has a strong chance." Emma was wheeled into the OR, her hand clutching mine until the very last second. She didn't say much, just whispered, "Thanks, Mom," before disappearing behind swinging doors. The wait felt endless. I paced the hallway, I stared at the floor, I answered texts, thanked donors, and then finally opened a blank spreadsheet on my laptop. Column A, name. Column B, contact info. Column C, amount given or action taken. Column D, notes. It wasn't a repayment list. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to return everything given to us. It was something deeper, a record, a way to remember who stood up when others stepped back, who believed me, who believed in Emma. By the time the surgeon returned, I had 42 names listed. "She's stable," he said. "Procedure went smoothly. She'll need time and therapy, but the nerves look good. She's going to walk." The weight dropped from my shoulders so hard I nearly fell. I thanked him. I called Tina. I messaged Jenny. I updated the post, and then I went to see my daughter. She was pale, groggy, but smiling. "They said I'll walk?" she asked. I nodded. They did. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Cool." That night, I sat beside her bed and stared at her face, memorizing every freckle, every line of worry that didn't belong on an 18-year-old. She had almost lost everything because of a system that measured worth in credit scores, because of a family who valued vacation photos over spinal health, because of people who should have shown up but didn't, and yet she was saved, not by blood, by community, by people who owed us nothing. That truth wrapped itself around me like a blanket, not warm, but solid. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who stands beside you when everything falls apart. 2 weeks after the surgery, Emma was well enough to move from the ICU to a recovery room with a view, just a narrow sliver of sky between the hospital buildings, but it felt like a miracle. I sat by her bedside every night, rereading the spreadsheet of donors like it was scripture. We were still swimming in bills, but she was healing. That was enough. Then the call came. It was a number I didn't recognise. Again. I hesitated before answering. "Hello? Rachel Walker? Yes? Hi, this is Greg Tanner. I'm an attorney. I worked with your grandmother Margaret before her passing." My heart skipped. Okay. I heard about Emma's accident from a mutual acquaintance, and I wanted to reach out with a quick question. Has Emma received access to the trust Margaret set up for her? I blinked. "What trust?" He paused. "She hasn't?" "No. My parents handled everything after Grandma passed. They told me it was all taken care of." Greg was silent for a moment. "Rachel, I drafted your grandmother's will myself. She made it very clear. Emma was to inherit the bulk of her estate upon turning 18. That includes a sizable financial trust." I didn't know. "She turned 18 recently, right?" "Yes, a month before the accident." then that trust should have been released to her already. If it hasn't, we need to look into why. My mouth was dry. You're saying my parents were designated trustees? They didn't own the money, they just managed it until Emma came of age. But if Emma hasn't received it, well, someone has some explaining to do. We scheduled a meeting the next day. When I hung up, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from clarity. All the puzzle pieces I'd buried for years were shaking loose. I remembered the way my parents had suddenly upgraded their lives right after Grandma died. The condo with the rooftop tub, the kitchen remodel gifted to Melissa, the family vacations, the sudden generosity to their church, their friends, their favourite charities. I thought they'd inherited it. I assumed, like a fool, that Grandma had left it all to them, but she hadn't. She'd left it to Emma, and they never told us. I closed the door quietly to Emma's room and stepped into the hallway. I scrolled through my phone to the photo they'd posted from Bali, my parents, grinning, cocktails in hand. Emma had been hooked up to machines that day, learning to breathe deeply again. My family had been sipping coconut liquor on a beach paid for by stolen money. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I hit save. I would need it later. The next morning, I met Greg at his office. He looked exactly how I remembered him. Grey hair, pressed suit, warm eyes that turned cold when he started speaking legal terms. I still have the original will, he said, placing it on the desk between us. Margaret was meticulous. The trust was explicit. Emma inherits upon her 18th birthday unless she is medically unfit, in which case it defers to her legal guardian, which is you. So they had no legal right to withhold it. None, Greg said. If they've accessed the funds or failed to transfer them, we're looking at breach of fiduciary duty, possibly even theft. My head was spinning. Greg leaned forward. Rachel, I need your help with one thing. Find out if your parents ever filed the transfer paperwork. If they didn't, and the trust account is still in their name, it's clear. If they moved the money, we'll need to follow the trail. What if they spent it? He frowned. Then we'll find out where it went. That night, after Emma drifted to sleep, I pulled out every folder, every envelope I had ever received from my parents. Nothing. No mention of a trust, no bank documents, no reference to any transfer. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking app, then into Emma's new account I'd opened after the fundraiser. Nothing there either. It wasn't just silence, it was erasure. They'd kept it from her, from me, from all of us. When Emma woke up the next morning, I told her everything, gently, carefully, but honestly. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. She didn't cry, she didn't ask why, she just whispered, "They stole from me." "Yes," I said. She looked away, jaw tightening. "And they still took that trip." I nodded. Her voice was low, steady, cold. "Then we sue." Greg worked fast. By the end of the week, he had filed a formal request for financial records related to the trust. He didn't wait long to follow the paper trail. "Your grandmother didn't just leave a trust," he explained, flipping through the documents. "She left a precise map of how it was to be used, where it was stored, and who had access. That access, as expected, had been granted solely to Frank and Darlene Walker, my parents. The trust fund was set up with $180,000, mostly in cash and bonds. Emma was the sole beneficiary. The terms were airtight. Upon her 18th birthday, the full balance was to be transferred into an account in her name, with Rachel Walker, me, listed as backup guardian if she were incapacitated. Greg's brow furrowed as he tapped the paperwork. "Here's the problem," he said. "There's no record of a transfer. Not to Emma, not to you." Then where did it go? I asked. He slid another folder toward me. Inside were printed bank statements. They weren't from Emma's trust account. They were from Frank and Darlene's personal one. Here's where, Greg said grimly. 6 weeks after Margaret's death, a wire transfer of $120,000 moved from the trust account into your parents' joint account. No explanation given, no authorization filed. He pointed to the transactions. 10 days later, a payment of $87,000 to a real estate firm. That condo they live in, paid in cash, no mortgage. I blinked. They bought that place with Emma's money. Greg nodded. And the rest? Dispersed slowly. Travel agencies, jewellery, a $5,000 spa retreat booked under Melissa's name, family cruise packages. They didn't just withhold Emma's inheritance, they spent it. The documents blurred in my vision. I sat in his office, numb, while Greg kept talking, now discussing legal terms, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud. But all I could hear was my mother's voice just weeks ago telling me they couldn't co-sign a loan because the timing was unfortunate. They could fund massages for Melissa, a beachfront condo, first-class airfare, but not a signature to save their granddaughter from paralysis. They didn't help because they couldn't. They didn't help because they had already stolen from her and spent it. When I returned to the hospital that evening, Emma was propped up, flipping through her physics textbook like it was just another study session. "How was the meeting?" she asked. I didn't sugarcoat it. I showed her the printouts. I walked her through the transactions. I told her how much was left. Barely enough to cover legal fees, if we were lucky. She stared at the numbers, her face unreadable. After a long silence, she looked up. Her voice was steady. "So they didn't just refuse to help? No. They didn't just lie? No." She nodded slowly. "They stole from me, used it on themselves, and then left me in a hospital bed with nothing." "Yes." Her eyes burned, not with tears, but something harder. "They didn't just walk away from me, Mum. They erased me." I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Emma turned her gaze back to the documents. "We need to go to court." I hesitated. "Are you sure this won't be easy?" "It's long, messy, it could get ugly." She didn't blink. "We're not doing this for money." "Then why?" Her answer was instant. "For the truth." That night I updated the spreadsheet. Column D, reason for giving. Next to Greg's name, I typed, "Fighting for what's right." Then I opened a new file. Case, Emma Walker versus Frank and Darlene Walker. Filed to be determined. Cause, because some lines shouldn't be crossed, even by family. Greg didn't waste a moment. By the end of that same week, we were sitting in his office again, this time surrounded by stacks of folders, documents, and annotated files. It felt less like a law office and more like a war room. "We need evidence," he said, tapping a legal pad with his pen. "Not emotion, not assumptions, cold, hard facts. That's how we win." Emma sat next to me, notebook open, pen already in hand. She wasn't a teenager anymore, not in that moment. She was a plaintiff in a lawsuit against her own grandparents, and her gaze was steely. Greg assigned tasks like a general. I was in charge of compiling personal communication from my parents, texts, emails, messages referencing the inheritance. Emma would help sort through financial records. Greg would request third-party documentation, bank statements, property records, purchase receipts. "Also," he added, pulling out an old folder, "I want to show you something I didn't share earlier." He handed me a printed email, dated 2 years before Margaret passed away. Subject, about Emma. I read it silently. My throat tightened. "Greg, I know I may not be around forever, so I want to make this clear. Emma is special, not just smart, truly thoughtful. She listens. She learns. She's the only one who sits through my long compound interest lessons without pretending to fall asleep. That girl's going to carry our name farther than any of us. I trust her with my legacy. Margaret, I passed the letter to Emma. She read it with trembling hands. She wrote that? She whispered. She did, Greg said gently. It's admissible in court. It's dated, archived, and it matches her tone in other emails. It wasn't just admissible, it was a knife in the case. A legacy passed not just with numbers, but with intention. We kept going. Greg pulled property records showing the condo Frank and Darlene had purchased was fully paid for in cash, just weeks after Margaret's passing. He obtained a breakdown of travel expenses booked under Melissa's name and cross-referenced them with withdrawals from the trust. We found photos online, Melissa's kids at a luxury beach resort, posted by Melissa herself. The caption, "Grateful to Mom and Dad for this unforgettable vacation." Greg grinned when he saw it. They always forget social media is discoverable. Then there were the emails, one from my mother to a realtor saying, "We finally have the funds to buy outright," dated 1 month after the trust funds were transferred. Another to Melissa. "Don't worry about the twins' tuition. We'll cover it. Things worked out perfectly." Emma saw that one and laughed bitterly. Worked out perfectly for them. There were receipts too. Jewellery stores, 5-star hotels, donations to their golf club's Founders Circle. None of these were investments in Emma's future. They were erasure, and still, as I printed and highlighted and stacked the evidence, I kept pausing to stare at Grandma's email, her words, her certainty. Emma didn't just deserve that money, she had earned Margaret's faith. And they stole it anyway. One afternoon, as we sorted documents, Emma looked up and asked, "Do you think they ever plan to tell me?" I thought about it. "No," I said softly. "I think they thought you'd never find out, or that if you did, you wouldn't fight. They don't know me very well." I smiled. "No, they don't." We worked late into the night, filing documents into labelled folders, property, travel, emails, witness statements, timeline. Greg promised to draft the initial complaint by the end of the week. As he flipped through the final pages, he murmured, "This is going to be brutal. They'll argue Margaret was confused. They'll say the will was unfair." "But it's real," Emma said. He nodded. "And we're going to prove it." The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and anxiety. Rows of benches sat half-filled with curious locals and a few people we didn't recognise. Word had gotten out. Maybe someone had posted online. Maybe it was just small-town gravity pulling everyone toward the spectacle of a family imploding in public. Emma sat beside me, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore the same navy blazer she'd worn to her college interview months ago before everything shattered. Greg stood calmly in front of the judge, our evidence compiled in 3 thick binders and a flash drive. When the judge called the case, Walker vs. Walker, there was a murmur through the room. Frank and Darlene entered from the side hallway. My mother wore a beige suit, pearls tight around her neck. My father's tie was crooked, neither looked at us. They sat down with their lawyer, a man with 2 white teeth and a smug confidence that immediately set my nerves on edge. He opened with a bold claim. "Your Honour, my clients assert that the decedent, Margaret Walker, was not of sound mind when she drafted this will. They contend the distribution of her estate was disproportionate and inconsistent with her lifelong intentions." Emma flinched. The lawyer continued, painting a picture of confusion, senility, and emotional manipulation. He called the will unusual. He called Grandma's trust in Emma naive. He even suggested Emma might have coerced Margaret through influence or perhaps even guilt. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but Greg didn't flinch. He rose slowly and said, "Your Honour, I personally drafted that will. I had known Margaret Walker for over 20 years. She was sharp, precise, ruthlessly logical. She calculated her retirement down to the cent. The idea that she was confused is laughable. And we have dated emails, financial logs, and third-party witnesses who will attest to her mental clarity." He handed the judge a packet. Included are 5 separate correspondences where Margaret explicitly refers to Emma as her sole heir. And as for influence, Emma was 16 when this will was written. She lived 2 states away, no contact except for holidays. The judge nodded. "Proceed." We presented the evidence methodically, photos of the luxury condo, receipts for cruises, the email from my mother to Melissa. "Don't worry about the twins' tuition." And then Melissa herself. She arrived late, walking stiffly in heels too tall. Her eyes were rimmed red, makeup smudged at the corners. She sat beside our parents, then was called to the stand. Greg didn't hesitate. "Ms. Melissa Walker, did you receive financial gifts from your parents between the years 2019 and 2023? "Yes," she said quietly. "Were you told the origin of these funds?" "No." "Did you ask?" "No. They said things were just better financially after Grandma passed. I assumed, I don't know, that they inherited everything." "And when did you learn the money came from a trust intended for your niece?" Her lip trembled. "Last month, after the lawsuit was filed." She glanced over at me, then at Emma. "I didn't know." "Would you have accepted those gifts if you'd known?" She shook her head slowly. "No." There was a pause. Greg looked at the judge. No further questions. But Melissa didn't step down right away. Instead, she turned fully toward Emma. "I used to think Rachel was the favourite," she said. "When we were kids, she got better grades, more attention from Grandma. I always felt like I had to compete. But now, I see it. I was the favourite. I was protected. I was funded." She looked down, voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Em. I didn't know. But I should have asked." Tears welled in her eyes. "For what it's worth, I'm on your side now." Emma didn't respond. She didn't move, but I saw the slightest nod. Frank and Darlene looked stunned, their faces pale. My mother tried to whisper something to Melissa as she stepped down, but Melissa ignored her. That moment shifted everything. The courtroom, so heavy with tension, seemed to tilt. The judge called for recess. Outside, reporters waited. Inside, Greg turned to us with a small, satisfied smile. "We've got them," he whispered. And for the first time since this all began, I believed him. The courtroom was quieter than usual on the day the verdict was announced. Maybe it was the weight of what we'd all been through. Maybe it was the inevitability sinking in. Either way, no one made eye contact as we took our seats. Emma sat beside me, hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't spoken much that morning, but her eyes were sharp. She wasn't nervous, just waiting. Greg stood as the judge entered. So did the rest of us. When the judge spoke, his voice was clear and deliberate. "After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and relevant documentation, the court finds in favour of the plaintiff, Emma Walker." I exhaled. It wasn't joy I felt. It wasn't even relief. It was confirmation. "We further rule that the defendants, Frank and Darlene Walker, acted in breach of fiduciary duty and knowingly misappropriated funds designated for the sole benefit of Emma Walker. As such, they are required to repay the full value of the trust, including interest and associated damages. Across the aisle, my mother went rigid. My father dropped his head into his hands. The judge continued, now addressing Greg. We understand a significant portion of the trust has already been spent. The court therefore authorises seizure of remaining assets to begin immediate recovery. These include, but are not limited to, the defendant's primary residence, their vehicles, investment accounts, and any property purchased post-disbursement. Greg nodded once. Understood, Your Honour. Then came the part no one was ready for. The judge cleared his throat. It has also come to light that substantial gifts and financial support were extended to third parties, including the defendant's other daughter, Melissa Walker. Melissa looked up, stunned. The court cannot compel third parties to return funds without evidence of intent or knowledge. However, we encourage full transparency and cooperation as further discovery proceeds. Translation: Melissa wouldn't be dragged into legal liability, not yet, but if she held onto any money knowingly misappropriated, the consequences would follow. Melissa's eyes darted to us. She looked confused, maybe even betrayed, but not by me, by them. After court adjourned, the bailiff handed Greg a packet outlining the list of assets to be recovered. I didn't need to see it. I already knew. The condo, the BMW, the emergency fund account my parents had always claimed was for rainy days. They wouldn't have it anymore. Emma and I walked out of the courthouse in silence, past the photographers and the whispers. She didn't speak until we were back in the car. "Do you think they'll blame us?" she asked. I didn't have to think. "Yes, absolutely," she nodded. "Even though they did this to themselves. They'll still say we ruined the family." Emma looked out the window. "They did that a long time ago." Later that evening, Greg called to confirm the seizure orders were in motion. Within 2 weeks, the keys to the condo will be handed over. The car's already been impounded, bank accounts frozen. Melissa's tuition fund for the twins is being flagged for review. If it's traceable to the trust, she might have to return it. I thought of Melissa's shocked face in court. She hadn't expected consequences. But consequences don't ask if you're ready. They come anyway. 2 days later, I got a message from her. It was short. "I didn't know. But I won't keep anything that wasn't mine. I'll do what's right." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Thank you." She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. Back at the hospital, Emma's physical therapist helped her stand unaided for the first time. She wobbled. She winced. But she stayed up. When she sat back down, sweating and breathless, she looked at me and grinned. "That's one less thing they took from me." The backlash came slowly, like a storm building behind distant hills. First, it was a voicemail from my uncle, my father's younger brother, who I hadn't spoken to in years. "Rach," his voice crackled, "I heard what's happening. I know they made mistakes, but don't you think this has gone far enough? They're old. They're your parents. Maybe just ease up." He paused before adding, "It's not too late to show grace." I didn't reply. I blocked his number instead. The thing people like him never understand is that grace without accountability isn't kindness. It's complicity. Within a month, Frank and Darlene had vacated the condo. The courts had seized it as part of the repayment, selling it far below market value to recoup what little was left. The luxury car was gone. So was the vacation property they rarely visited but loved to brag about. They moved into a dingy rental on the outskirts of town. No balcony, no concierge, no spa tub. Just peeling walls, noisy neighbours, and the constant hum of freeway traffic outside the window. I knew this not because I went to see them, but because the internet did what the internet does. Neighbours posted photos. Someone recognised them. It didn't take long before whispers turned into memes. From penthouse to pavement, one cruel caption read, under a blurry shot of Darlene dragging a box up a narrow stairwell. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel satisfied. I just kept scrolling. Extended family stopped reaching out. Old friends disappeared from their lives. The invitations to brunches, fundraisers, and family reunions quietly dried up. People didn't want to associate with the grandparents who stole from their own granddaughter. Still, I didn't expect what came next. It was a Thursday afternoon. Emma was home, resting after a grueling physical therapy session. She was in better spirits, slowly regaining mobility and strength. She was checking messages when she froze. "Mom," she said, "you need to hear this." She handed me her phone. It was a voice memo sent from an old friend of hers, Marcy, from the school orchestra. "Thought you might want this," Marcy had written. I pressed play. The recording was faint, but clear enough. It was Darlene's voice. "I don't know why everyone's acting like we're monsters. We did our best. It's not like Emma needed all that money anyway. She would have just wasted it. Melissa would have known what to do with it. Honestly, we should have made her the heir from the beginning." There was silence. Then Darlene added, almost bitterly, "Rachel was always too stubborn. Emma's just like her. And look where that got us." I sat in silence, phone still in my hand. Emma didn't speak either. She didn't have to. That clip wasn't rage-inducing. It was clarifying. They hadn't just stolen money. They had never seen Emma as worthy. Not as a person, not as family, certainly not as legacy. I finally looked at Emma. "Do you want me to forward this to Greg?" She shook her head. "No, I don't care what she says anymore. That's her truth to live with." Then she added more softly, "I'm done letting them rent space in my head." I nodded. She was stronger than I'd ever been, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. I thought it was over. We had won the civil case. Assets were seized, debts acknowledged, and Emma was finally beginning to live like a teenager again. Studying for college entrance exams, hanging out with friends, smiling more often than not. I had started sleeping through the night without waking up to a racing heart. Then Greg called. "Rachel," he said, tone low but urgent, "we have a problem." My stomach tightened. "What kind of problem?" "I've been going through some secondary financial records. Stuff that didn't come up in the first discovery. You're not going to like this." He sent me a file within the hour. It was a scan of international bank activity, offshore transfers. One stood out. A wire transfer of $46,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands. Account holder, Linda Carter. My jaw dropped. Linda was my aunt, my mother's sister. A retired art teacher who'd never once shown interest in high finance or tropical tax shelters. I called Greg back instantly. "You think my parents used her name?" He didn't even hesitate. "I think they used her as a front. The transfer came days before the asset freeze was ordered. They knew they were about to lose everything. They tried to hide the money. They did hide the money. We just didn't see it in time." I felt the old, familiar heat of rage rise in my chest. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that simmers, dangerous and slow. Greg kept going. "There are more transfers, smaller ones, all routed through secondary names tied to your extended family, cousins, a friend of a friend. Some came through a shell company your father incorporated 4 years ago. It was dormant until 2 months ago. They planned this. Exactly." He paused, then added, "We're filing again. This time, criminal charges. Fraud, intent to conceal assets, possibly conspiracy. I closed my eyes and exhaled. I don't know whether I'm shocked or not, I admitted. Greg's voice softened. I wish I could say this was rare, but people like your parents, they don't see what they did as theft. They see it as adjusting, protecting what's rightfully theirs. But it wasn't theirs. It never was. No, he said, and now it's going to cost them even more. The next week passed in a haze of paperwork, depositions, and updated subpoenas. Greg built the new case with surgical precision. Every transaction was time-stamped, every shell company linked, every relative's involvement documented, and this time the charges weren't just about misappropriation, they were about deception, about fraudulent concealment, about knowing violations of court orders. I watched it unfold with a numb sort of clarity. Emma asked for updates, but didn't seem shaken by the news. If anything, she seemed resolute. They had a chance to stop, she said, and they chose not to. On the day the new charges were filed, Greg handed me a copy of the complaint. It was 10 pages long, packed with legal jargon and damning facts. At the bottom was the official title, The State of Washington versus Frank and Darlene Walker. Not Emma, not me, the state. For the first time, it wasn't just personal, it was criminal. And they were going to answer to more than just us. The courtroom looked different this time. Sterile, colder, somehow smaller. Maybe it was the weight of what was being discussed. Civil trials are tense, yes, but criminal trials? They hum with finality. Greg sat at the prosecution table, his hands folded neatly. Expression calm, but razor sharp. I sat behind him with Emma, both of us silent, both of us watching. Frank and Darlene entered through the side door, escorted by bailiffs. Their lawyer from the civil case had been replaced by someone new, flashier, louder, more desperate. The kind who tries to charm juries with cheap suits and fast words. But today, charm wouldn't matter. The charges were clear. Fraudulent concealment of assets, willful violation of a court order, and financial deception relating to a protected trust. The prosecution didn't need theatrics. The facts spoke for themselves. Digital trails, wire transfers, emails, offshore accounts in the name of a retired aunt who hadn't filed a passport renewal in over a decade. Greg didn't even call me to the stand. He didn't need to. He called the bank's compliance officer. He called a digital forensics specialist. He called the notary who had certified the original trust. And he called Linda, my aunt. She sat nervously on the witness stand, holding a tissue in one hand. They said it was temporary, she murmured. That they'd move the money back before anyone noticed. Did they tell you the source of the funds? No. Did you ask? No, I didn't want to know. That last line landed with a thud in the courtroom. The defense attorney did his best, blaming confusion, bad advice, age, even suggesting the defendants had acted out of panic rather than malice. But it didn't work. The judge didn't even blink when he read the sentence. For the charges brought before this court, the defendants are hereby found guilty. I heard Darlene suck in a sharp breath. The court sentences Frank and Darlene Walker to 1 year of probation with mandatory oversight. In addition, they are to complete 500 hours of court-approved community service within the next 12 months. No prison. I wasn't surprised. Their age, the non-violent nature of the crime, and their lack of prior convictions made incarceration unlikely. But that didn't mean they were spared. Because what came next was worse for them. Their service was public, assigned by the county, street clean-up, clerical filing at the courthouse, graffiti removal. 2 weeks after the verdict, someone sent me a photo. It was Darlene, face red, wearing a neon orange vest, hunched over with a trash picker in one hand and a sack in the other. Frank was behind her, looking miserable, holding a broom on a cracked sidewalk outside the post office. No one posed. No one smiled, but someone snapped the picture and someone else posted it, and the internet did what the internet does. Within hours, it spread. From luxury cruises to local cleanup, one caption said. Justice in high vis, said another. I didn't share it. I didn't need to. Emma saw the image on her own. Someone had forwarded it from a school group chat. She stared at it for a moment, then handed me the phone. Her voice was quiet, but unwavering. They're not embarrassed because they did something wrong. They're embarrassed because someone saw. I didn't respond. She wasn't asking for one. She was stating a fact. We didn't celebrate. We didn't gloat. We didn't post a word. But we watched, not to feel power, to feel closure. I was in the middle of folding laundry when the phone rang again. It was Greg. I hope you're sitting down, he said, voice tight with something between satisfaction and disbelief. That's never a good way to start a call, I replied, placing a half-folded towel back on the bed. He exhaled slowly. We've found something, or rather someone else found it, and it made its way to me. Found what? The deletion logs from your father's laptop. Turns out he wasn't as tech-savvy as he thought. I sat. Go on. Greg explained that a forensic tech working through the local DA's office had been reprocessing digital files we previously didn't have access to. An old hard drive backup had been turned over late in the discovery phase of the first criminal case. But they hadn't gotten through all of it until now. There are files, Greg said, showing attempted deletions of offshore account access credentials. The names, passwords, routing details, all wiped manually the same day we filed the initial civil case. My mouth went dry, so they tried to cover their tracks. Yes, and that's obstruction. It elevates everything. This wasn't just theft. This was concealment with intent to mislead a court. It's very serious. How serious are we talking? Greg didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. We're refiling, Rachel, criminal case number 2, this time with teeth. The formal charge was obstruction of justice with intent to destroy evidence in an active investigation, a felony. And this time, even age wouldn't save them. The second trial moved faster, maybe because the first had paved the way, maybe because public interest had grown. Whatever the reason, the courthouse was full by the time Frank and Darlene shuffled in again. They looked different, smaller. My mother's hair was duller. My father's hands shook slightly as he adjusted his coat. Their lawyer had been replaced once more, this time by a court-appointed one. They couldn't afford anyone else. Greg didn't speak much this round. He didn't need to. The logs were displayed on screen, each deletion time-stamped. Each file marked with usernames that matched bank accounts we'd already traced. There were backup emails, ones my father had sent to himself for record keeping, then tried to scrub using a basic file shredder tool. It hadn't worked. Technology had remembered what he wanted forgotten. The judge's face was stone. This isn't simply fraud, she said from the bench. It's a conscious, ongoing effort to avoid accountability, and it shows a profound lack of remorse. Their defense, they claimed confusion, poor memory. A misunderstanding of digital tools. It didn't matter. On sentencing day, the room was completely silent. Frank and Darlene stood side by side as the judge read the final ruling. For the deliberate destruction and concealment of financial records, this court sentences the defendants to 1 year of incarceration at the county correctional facility. No probation, no community service, actual prison time. The bailiffs approached. Darlene gasped audibly, one hand flying to her chest. Frank didn't move at all. He just stared forward, expression blank. Handcuffs clicked around their wrists. They were escorted out, step by step, while no one in the courtroom made a sound. Not one objection. Not one tear. Not even from me. Not from Emma. Later, as we walked out into the bright afternoon light, Emma shielded her eyes and said, "Do you think they'll understand now?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe. But it's not about them understanding. It's about us being free." She nodded quietly. Behind us, the courthouse doors shut with a satisfying, echoing thud. The prison sentence didn't change our day-to-day lives, not in the way you might expect. There were no parades, no celebration dinners, no victorious posts. Justice isn't like that. It doesn't wrap itself up in balloons and confetti. It's quiet, settling, like a fog, finally lifting. Emma returned to her routines: physical therapy, college prep, working part-time at the community library. The lawsuit settlements had covered her medical debts and set aside enough for school. But Emma didn't want to spend it all. She had other plans. One evening, as I stirred pasta in the kitchen, she slid a manila folder across the counter toward me. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside were documents from a brokerage firm. An account opened in Emma's name. The initial deposit matched the remainder of the inheritance the court had recovered from my parents. It wasn't the full amount Margaret had left, but it was enough to build on. "Compound Project," I read aloud from the title page. "That's what you're calling it?" Emma nodded. "Grandma always said compound interest was like magic. She taught me how it works when I was 10. I smiled, remembering Margaret's kitchen table, charts, ledgers, and that old calculator with the oversized buttons. Emma continued, "I want to grow this slowly, responsibly. Learn the game before I start playing it big. And one day I want to use it for something good, a scholarship fund maybe, or a grant for young women interested in finance." "You don't want to touch it for school?" "I've got enough for school from the civil payout," she said. This is legacy money. It's not about me. It's about what comes next." There was no bitterness in her voice, just clarity. She had taken betrayal and turned it into blueprint. I watched her as she filed the last paper into the folder and clicked it shut. At 18, she had more composure than most adults I knew. She stood straighter, walked with purpose, didn't flinch when people whispered her name. Even the ones who had once defended Frank and Darlene no longer did. Time has a way of revealing who people really are, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. "I want to testify if we ever speak at a youth forum or anything," Emma said later that night, sitting on the floor with her laptop. "About what?" "About boundaries, about accountability, about how silence doesn't equal loyalty." I sat on the edge of the couch watching her type. "And about how justice doesn't always come when you want it," she added, "but it does come if you fight long enough, hard enough." Her fingers paused on the keyboard. She turned to me. "Do you forgive them?" The question landed in the space between us. I thought about it. I thought about the hospital nights, the loan denials, the silence, the Facebook posts from beaches I'd never see. I thought about the missing money, the years of favoritism, the calculated lies. And I thought about Emma standing on legs that doctors once said might never hold her weight again. "No," I said, I don't. She nodded, not expecting otherwise. I'm not angry anymore, I added, but that doesn't mean I forgive them. Good, Emma said, her tone neither cold nor cruel, just firm. Some people think forgiveness is the only way to heal, but I think sometimes consequences are enough. She turned back to her laptop, added one final sentence to the file she was preparing for her investment account, and read it aloud before hitting save. Some people don't deserve forgiveness, just consequences. I didn't say anything. I just nodded because she was right.